Stop messing around, stop fooling around, stop delaying, stop procrastinating. Get up, get out, get it done. Everything is possible, nothing is a problem, and anything can be overcome. I just get my ass up out of bed, I get my shit together, and I get out and I start the fight. And that will transform you from a mere mortal into a superhuman being. I've never, ever, ever met anybody who told me that they got rich watching their IRA or their 401k.
Welcome back to the Daily Cash Flow. How you doing, Peter?
George, my man.
You want to just get into it? Anything you want to touch on before we hop in?
We can get into it. What is
Awesome.
it? What is the it?
You know, who knows what it is? It is always a moving target. But for today, I wanted to start off talking about WeWork. Recently, Sandeep Mathrani, the chief executive of WeWork, he announced his departure from WeWork. And the media is kind of interpreting this as a sign that there's no resurrection for office space because WeWork, rents more office space than any other company in the US. For me, I feel like given the chaos, that WeWork has wrought in the past, this analysis seems to lack a little bit of nuance. But what are your thoughts on that relationship?
His departure is an indication of not just the future of office space. There's so much stuff going on with WeWork and with him, the controversy and the company's history and the capitalization and how it's a hornet's nest of stuff. It's not just a look on the future of the office market. But I will tell you that I found something really funny this week. One very successful private equity fund manager was quoted as saying, with offices, take what you can get and run. And run. So that, to me, is more of an indication, because he's talking about the office market. Right. The guy's departure from WeWork as the CEO, it could be one of a million things. But to hear someone make comments who's involved in the ownership of major office buildings in every major market across the U.S. and the globe, say, hey, take the money and run. Whatever you can get, take it and run the other direction as fast as you can. To hear that is way more of an indictment of the future of the office market than the departure of WeWork's CEO. The WeWork CEO's story is so hamstrung by so many different issues. I don't know that it's a look into the future of the office market as much as it is all the mishigas and craziness that WeWork is.
Right.
Look, I think that in many suburban markets, shared office space is definitely the future, but only because major urban center office space has been on such a decline and is expected to remain at such a decline because these big companies in center cities are having difficulty getting people back into the offices full time. Right. So sure, if you open up a 25,000 square foot shared office situation in some suburb, I think the likelihood of that surviving is way better than a large 1 million square foot office building in the center of a major MSA. But I love that the guy said, take the money and run in the other direction. It's to hear people who are in the middle of it say that.
Yeah.
But everything has a cycle. So people like to buy when there's blood on the streets. There's blood on the streets now. So maybe people are going to buy these buildings. We talked about how only 10 to 20% of these office buildings are convertible into some other use because of the way they're constructed. I don't know what's going to happen with these things. It's a big mess. I could care less about the departure of the WeWork CEO, and I care more about the money, the debt that's coming due, and the demand for office space. And I get more of a direct indication of the demand for office space by following the guys that own these office buildings. Look what they're doing. If they're selling and running in the other direction, you should probably too. If they are quietly purchasing everything that's being foreclosed on and no one's noticing, but you notice that they're buying all this stuff up, maybe you want to buy some too. It's easy to find out who is purchasing buildings and real estate and when properties transact because it's a matter of public record. So you could just look up an address of an office building that's been vacant and foreclosed on. And if it's been sold, if there's a recent transaction where it's been sold to a new owner, you can do your research on the new owner. What are they going to do with it? Are they a developer? Are they a nonprofit and they're going to move in and they just got a cheap building for their charity? The American Cancer Society, I don't know, needs office space, and they took over one of these ghost office buildings. You'll be able to find what the details are of that story if you do your research. It's public knowledge. It's out there. If there are more buyers than sellers for office buildings, then perhaps the future is a little brighter than what we've been making it out to be here on this show and our dialogue. But I don't believe that there's more buyers for sellers. I think the banks are going to foreclose or take back the keys, and these vacant office buildings are going to sit on the bank's balance sheets for a long, long time. And remember, when a bank takes back real estate and owns real estate, it's not an asset to them. It's a liability. So they need to get rid of it. Now, if it sits there for 4 seconds and someone comes in and buys it, maybe that's a healthy indication of the future of the office market. But if it sits there for a year, 2 years, 3 years, 8 months, whatever it is, a long time like that, there's not a lot of buyers for that stuff. And it's a problem for the bank, and the future of the office market just remains to be really grim. Hey, man, I am not buying office space. If you're watching this show trying to see what I'm doing, I'm not buying office space. Although I was recently touring many of the new construction Class A office buildings in New York City. They are very, very impressive. Highly, highly amenitized. I mean, this building, One Vanderbilt, you guys got to see it. Look it up. It's incredible what they built. Visually stunning, architecturally incredible.
Yeah, I have a friend that was just there. And
it's an amazing thing. And some of these Park Avenue buildings are full. You know, Citadel took the whole building, and they've got incredible amenities. There's gyms, there's food, there's beverage, there's security, there's concierge services, there's like shared space, and it's amazing luxury space. And it's, I mean, these are incredible buildings of the future. These buildings are full. But all the buildings that were built in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, with their choppy floor plates and with their low ceilings and with their inability to adapt to different layouts and with the way the elevator banks work and, all of that stuff. Those buildings are really challenged to find a new use in 2023.
Yeah, I mean, this reminds me of our conversation with Lindsay Ornstein, that the kind of vibe of that conversation, which was, these Class A, new construction, kind of new reno situations are going to be fine because they're doing an excellent job. They're providing things that you can't get elsewhere. But if it's just space, that's just, just space in New York City, that's not going to be sustainable.
Listen, whatever Lindsay Ornstein says, you listen to and you stick to her like glue, because she's never wrong, and no one knows the office market in New York City better than Lindsay Ornstein and Open Impact. We can talk about office as much as we like, but follow Lindsay and Open Impact because she's really the guru.
Yeah, she'll have the final word. You mentioned when a real estate transaction happens, it's in the public domain. Is that something that you pay attention to regularly? Is that part of your kind of regular routine? Or
I track transactions. I mean, there's buildings that I have my sights on in certain markets. And I'm tracking who the debt holders are, and I'm tracking when notes come due. All of that's public information as well. And so, I try and pay attention to that because there's other people out there that want to buy those buildings too. So I'm in competition. I want information and data that's going to aid me in knowing how and when to pull the trigger and for what price and what the details are. Very rarely, George, do I just get a phone call from a broker who's got an MLS listing and says, hey, have you seen this MLS listing that's been on the market for a few weeks now and wondering if you've seen it and if you're interested? Like, no, it's too late. By that time, the ship has sailed. I want to see things before they hit the public MLS where everybody's trampled on them. I want to see deals before my competitors see the deals. I want to have an inside track. That's how you win. That's how you have an advantage and compete. If I just sit back and wait for brokers to call me to tell me what's now listed on the market, there's no inside track. There's no competitive advantage. I'm just competing in a massive sea of mom and pop purchasers. It's not where I want to be. I want to be where the professionals are and where the least amount of competition is. If there is competition, hopefully they're professionals and they're fewer and far between. And that's going to be inside track stuff. I'm tracking who the debt holders are. I'm tracking unpaid taxes. I'm tracking code enforcement violations that go uncured for extensive amounts of time and they build up in large numbers. I mean, I'm speaking directly with municipalities and lenders and lien holders. I'm tracking the general contractor community to see who's making payments to the contractors on a regular basis. And if there's any property owners that haven't made payments to contractors for work performed at a building, maybe they don't have the money. Maybe they're a seller. I don't know. But I'm going to have a first track to that property owner before it hits the market. I don't want to be with the market. I want to be ahead of the market. That's how I do it.
I'm a big fan of the Ocean's 11 movies, which I promise this applies to what we're about to talk about.
I like those too.
Yeah, yeah. In Ocean's 13, there's this scene with Matt Damon and Ellen Barkin where they're trying to put one over on her. And he says, my boss owns all the air south of Beijing. And she goes, the air? And he goes,
Put it to you this way. Try building something larger than 3 stories in the Tianjin province. See if his name comes up in your database then.
I love that scene.
yeah. And
he's got the big fake nose
yes,
on.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
love
The
that
nose,
scene.
the nose plays. The nose plays. And yeah, one of my favorites. And I only recently realized that that's a real thing, that air rights are a real thing. I was reading something about in New York City real estate in particular. Is that something you've dealt with personally? Like,
George, any real estate person has dealt with air rights, density, height, and not only is it air rights, but there's also underground rights. And then, depending on your location, there's water rights. There's So there's all these different things that attach to just the plat of dirt, which is the lot that you purchase, the lot of land. Yeah. So in New York City, for example, air rights can be accumulated, they can be bought and sold, they can be aggregated together so that they can stack up very high. That's how you get density to build tall buildings. And if you ever go to New York City, you'll see lots of examples of this. So even in Times Square, when you first pull in either the bus station, the Port Authority bus station, or through the Lincoln Tunnel, you come into New York and you see brand new, beautiful buildings that take up almost the entire block, except for one sliver on a corner, and they're cantilevered over the corner building because that guy didn't want to sell. So the developer said, all right, man, we'll just build over you. We'll buy your air rights, you can keep your building, and we'll just build over you on your air rights that we've just purchased from you. Wow. And that's how you get these buildings that aren't a perfect square or rectangle. Right. Instead, they're sort of oddly shaped with portions that stick out over other buildings, which are old, historic buildings or old buildings that just... The owners never sold those properties, and the developer said, all right, we'll just build around them or we'll build over them. And that's how air rights impact building and development. George, you'll see holdouts when developers are doing assemblages of many different lots and putting them together to create one final lot that they want to develop a big project on. Yeah, you're going to find that some people sell out to the developer early on in the process. Some people sell out a little later on, and some people hold out, man. They do not want to sell. And there's been whole communities that have been built around the holdouts. You know, there's stories. You could look it up. There are many, many stories everywhere where the holdouts just said, hey, I'm just not selling ever. And the developer gets like every other piece except that one piece. Right. And they just build an irregular thing around the holdout. And it's really weird. Like if you look at it from an aerial perspective, like a satellite vision, you'll see these really weird
configurations.
Site plans and property lines that just sort of zigzag around the holdouts. It happens every day in real estate. George, you have air rights, you have ground rights, you have mineral rights, water rights, you have all sorts of rights associated with real estate. It's not just building 2 or 3 stories on a square plot of land. You have to look into your zoning, you have to look into the lot size, you have to see what's allowable. But in New York City and in all of these city centers, density and height is a huge thing that comes into play with every deal. Air rights have their own value. They contribute to the buildable square feet. So if you've got a lot with 10,000 buildable square feet and you're able to stack another 50,000 square feet of air rights on top of that, you've now gone from 10,000 to a 60,000 square foot buildable. Yeah, wow. That's a much more valuable proposition because density dictates how high you can go up. It dictates how much rentable square footage you'll have once you build. It dictates that you'll have more tenants paying you more money. George, gives you more expensive property, more valuable property. Air rights is a big thing. You have to pay attention to it. Look, when you're building a house in the suburbs, air rights not so much. Right. But in these urban MSAs and these regions that are center city where density is everything, air rights comes into play. You can negotiate for it. You can trade off with the towns and the cities for it in your zoning applications. You can buy air rights from your neighbors. If you're putting an assemblage together, air rights are going to come into play because it dictates how high you can go up. You have to pay attention to this stuff.
GM and Ford have announced that they'll be using Tesla's charging stations. You saw that. And
big move.
It's a big move. And now, in hindsight, you can look back and say, oh, like Tesla's decision to remain incompatible with CCS, the combined charging systems, it's paid off. It's a great decision. Yeah. But if you looked back at that time, there was a big gamble because that was the predominant, charging standard at that point.
So not Tesla's decision. Let's be clear. Elon Musk's decision. And man, was he right. And man, is he just continuing to make it rain. You know, you can say what you want about the guy, and you're right. And we're having the conversation in hindsight. And it seemed perhaps crazy back then, but he knew that if he could get everybody to adopt his charging platform, there's a lot of money in that. And there you go. Here we are. He was right. He won. And these other automakers are now partnering with him on that platform. And it's a big deal for Tesla.
Yeah.
It's a big, big deal. So I want to be clear. It was Elon, and it was the right decision. And, I thought it was crazy back then, too. But, hey, he continues to deliver. He continues to produce.
Yeah.
Is he super wealthy? Is he one of the richest guys in the world? Yeah, this is why. Because you get paid for the problems that you solve. You get paid for the level of the importance and magnitude of the issues that you deal with successfully. He deals with big, big issues, and this is another notch in his belt. And you know what? There's going to be more.
Yeah, it reminds me of Steve Jobs had a similar experience with the kind of the dongle situation or connections with
I love
his
that word.
early Macs. Yeah, dongle is a hilarious word. But yeah, not making Macs compatible with other computers. And that seemed like a crazy thing at the time. And I think he said, Bob Dylan doesn't allow other people to finish his songs for them.
Right.
It's that kind of thing. But again, it's a big gamble. And so my question to you is...
Well, Bob Dylan wants the freedom
right.
to realize his vision. I mean, that's a big deal in business and in life. Like when you're creating something and building something, it could be, a house, it could be a piece of art, it could be a written work, like whatever. Like it's your creation. It lives in your mind until you then make it real. So your ability to make it real, as dictated or governed by restrictions, rules, regulations, all that kind of stuff. It's a big deal. It can be impactful. The Bob Dylan example is great. It wouldn't be a Bob Dylan work if someone else finished the song. He knew that, and that's why you mentioned it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so I'm curious, like, as an investor or somebody that's like keeping tabs on these, younger companies when Tesla was younger or Apple was younger, how do you assess when someone makes a risky move like that? And how do you kind of determine, well, this seems like it might, be a good horse to bet on, that kind of thing?
It's part gut. It's part intuition. Some of it can be quantitative if you're following industry trends and there's perhaps past precedent that you can look to and see, well, did the first guy succeed? Because maybe that's an indication that followers might succeed making a similar decision. Man, that's high level stuff. You're getting into like ninja territory. There's how do you know when you meet the person for you, right? How do you know if Elon Musk's decision to require the major automakers to use his platform for charging was a good one? A lot of people thought it was a bad decision long ago, but now we see it was the right one. What were the indicators that we could have seen long ago to say, hey, this is going to be the right? I don't know what the indicators were.
Yeah.
You either know the industry and you're an analyst and you cover everything there is in the EV space and you know, but for the regular people like us, it has to be a gut. Like you just have to have a sense of the world and where the markets are going and how people behave. Human behavior, the understanding and comprehension of human behavior is the single biggest thing that I grapple with. I want to get better at that because if I can predict what customers are going to want and need, I can sell it to them. If I can predict what's going to happen geopolitically or socially in our culture and society, I can solve problems and I can avoid problems and I can, right? So I think a lot of it is intuition and gut, and a big portion of it is quantitative if you're able to have
and getting to know the industry, it sounds like you're saying, getting to know, taking a risk on some kind of asset or industry that you have no kind of knowledge of or previous experience with is, again, going to be more like making a bet on blackjack or roulette as opposed to making a investment in something that has kind of fundamental business points that you're, attaching yourself to.
Yep.
Nature, the British scientific journal, they released an article earlier this month, and they were pushing back on this idea that morality is declining in society. It's something we hear all the time that like, everything's going down the tubes, everything's getting worse. And they were saying that this is actually an illusion, that things are actually better than they've ever been. And so we can talk a little bit about that if you want, but really regardless of whether they're right or not, I wanted to ask you always talk about the importance of being positive and having a positive attitude. What are some ways that you were able to maintain a positive attitude in this year or in the last few months?
Oh, heavy drug use.
That'd be a real hot take.
Some of the ways that I've maintained a positive attitude, I focused on my health, made me feel better. My exercise regimen is increased and changed a little bit. My diet has changed. So I've started to focus more on my physical well-being, and it's helped my mental well-being.
Yeah. We don't have to go super granular, but what kind of changes have you made with
no dairy, no gluten, and a lot less sugar.
Okay. Yeah. That sounds great. Yeah. And you feel better?
Because I want to plank for 15 minutes like you.
Yeah. I love those planks. You know?
Yeah, I'm one of these people that feels that society is in a decline and morality is at all-time lows. I'm like the Ray Dalio supporter. I feel like we're headed towards a civil war and destruction. It's not going to be tomorrow or next week, but I don't know. How much longer can we stay on a similar path that we're on now without like everybody just ripping each other's heads off? Like that's sort of how I feel. So yes, it's important to maintain a positive attitude against the backdrop of that, because I believe that is the backdrop.
Well, I think that's why I ask is I think it's even more important if you believe that things are getting worse to be able to sustain kind of the output and the productivity, and you're able to do that. So that's why I wanted to ask that question.
I feel we're on a direct path to one of these futuristic movies where they can turn you on and off as they see fit, and they can control your behaviors. You know what I saw? I saw the video of Larry Fink. Talking about Larry Fink, the head of BlackRock, who controls 25% of the world's global wealth.
That's crazy.
25%. Yeah. Trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. He controls it. He was on video quoted saying, look, you have to force people's behaviors to change. Here at BlackRock, we're forcing people's behaviors to change. We're just not going to pay you if you don't behave the way we want you to behave. And he's talking about social issues and the social issues in the workplace and corporate America. And it's a very progressive mindset that he's forcing on employees of BlackRock, and he's forcing on the consumers through his control of all these companies and all this real estate. And it's an amazing thing. And so, you've got arguably some sort of social decline happening, whether it's morality or whether it's just divisiveness or whatever the case may be. You've got a guy like Larry Fink who sees it and says, all right, we're going to start controlling and forcing your behaviors to what we want them to be. And I think we're all just headed to a place where we're going to be wearing the same color onesies with like some sort of scannable like device on our sleeves and like an implanted chip in our neck. And we're going to eat the same food and nutrients. And they're going to direct us to different places to do different menial tasks and labor. And we're going to be like a monotone, homogenous army of society.
Sounds fun.
Yeah. Like, I don't know when that's happening, but like between AI and auto-driving cars and Larry Fink wanting to change behaviors and the way society is divided up right now, and it's cracking every time you look at a new wall. There's cracks and the structure is crumbling. I see a lot of that, and I feel and sense a lot of that. And I bet that if we're honest with ourselves, a lot of people out there also see a lot of this stuff every day. So how I deal with it is I try and be more successful and help more people and make more money and lock down necessities for my family, and a combination of all those things.
Yeah, stay on the path.
Stay on the path, man. It's scary out there. It's beautiful too.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. I think that's where I kind of land with this, is that we're clearly in a transitional time and there's a lot of carnage, and that's true. But I think the good gets better and the worse gets worse. I feel like that's how it tends to happen historically.
I love that, George. Say that again.
The good gets better and the worse gets worse.
Oh, I love that.
That's been my experience in my short life, but also I think historically, I think we can see that kind of being borne out. And so I feel like, right now we just have to hope that we can attach ourselves to the good and follow, like you say, stay on that path, and not get too distracted by the carnage. But yeah, I think to deny that we're not in some kind of transitional experience and that bad things are happening, I think that's, delusional.
I agree.
This TikTok came across my feed the other day. TikTok recently went viral of an employee who flies from Charleston to New York City once a week to save on the cost of living. According to Fortune magazine, the average rent for, I think, New York City is like $3,500 around, and then while a round trip from Charleston to Newark comes around to like $200, so it'd be like $800 a month.
Yeah. By the way, the average New York City rent hit $4,000 recently. Right. So. Yeah. Whatever the article is that you read, that
Fortune's outdated. Yeah,
it perhaps is outdated because the number going around the New York City rental market is $4,000 average rent.
Yeah. So we can talk about the rental market as well, but I think we're seeing this kind of increase of people not just working remotely, but doing really dramatic kind of remote work. And
so this person is living in Charleston for some amount of money that's far less than $4,000 a month.
Yeah.
And they're paying $800 a month to fly up.
Because they need to be in the office for once a week.
Once a week.
Yeah.
Boy, that's weird.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Because you have to also add to that your time value of money. So now you're doing airport
you're waking
driving
up at 3,
and parking and the flying and the, maybe people don't care about that. And maybe getting on a plane from Charleston to New York is like taking a taxi across town for this person. Yeah. But to me, I have to factor in the time because my time is worth a lot of money.
Totally.
And if I'm on a plane, I don't know. You have to factor that in, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And you have to factor in the schlep and the inconvenience. So, but if he's earning New York money, but he's living in Charleston, I don't know. Sounds like he's got something dialed in.
Yeah.
I knew someone that did that once a long time ago. Yeah. A guy, there was a big building on 3rd Avenue that I had space in, and it was owned by a very wealthy family from United Arab Emirates. And the person who ran the family office and ran this family's real estate holdings was who I signed my lease with and who I corresponded to about the space that I had in the building. This guy flew up from South Carolina.
Wow.
Lived in New York like Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and then went home to South Carolina on Thursday night. And that was 25, 30 years ago.
Yeah, I was going to say the disparity was probably less back then, I would imagine.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's wild. So what this made me think of is, your team is mostly consolidated. You like to keep everyone kind of in the office, kind of...
For the most part.
Yeah, you like that interpersonal experience, but you do work with people all over the world and you manage staff all over the world. Do you have any key pieces of advice that leaders need to keep in mind when they do manage people in this kind of distributed labor market?
So certain functions you're able to outsource because they don't need to interact with others. They don't need to consume your corporate culture. They don't need mentorship or access to you as a leader or your other team members for help and collaboration. Those types of functions you can farm out to the global labor workforce. We were talking about Lindsay Ornstein before. I quote Lindsay, "Your culture is everything. That's what makes you who you are, your company, what it is. It's what makes people want to work there. And if you don't have a company culture to offer, you're just a widget and a gadget in the employment landscape.
Right.
So you have to really work at creating and maintaining your corporate culture. People have to have access to that, and your employees have to consume that. And if they can't, they get further and further away from your mission, from your purpose, from your energy, from your mentorship. So you have to consider those things. My core teams, my core people, we're all together. There's a few functions that I can farm out to a remote location at a very affordable price because they don't need to interact or be a part of the company culture. But for the most part, my company culture is very important to me, and I want it to be very important to the people that I work with. For people who are in business, who are leaders, who are starting businesses, who already manage businesses, what's your company culture and how do you maintain it and even build it and change it over time? As times change, your culture has to change. It's so critical. And Lindsay was so right when she pointed this out with us. You have to have this corporate culture, and you can't let it get diluted if you choose to go more fragmented and farmed out and virtual with your labor.
I read an article by Ryan Holiday recently in which he said that the best decision he ever made was taking a pay cut to write The Obstacle Is the Way. It's arguably his most popular book, yeah. And that was kind of in exchange for freedom to write it the way he wanted to. Is there an example in your own life?
Are we talking about the Bob Dylan thing again?
Yeah, a little bit, actually. Yeah, where you kind of turn down, it doesn't necessarily have to be money, but I think in this case, yeah, is there a situation where you essentially took a pay cut or had a lower ROI in exchange for something else that was more valuable to you?
George, we see this all the time. Athletes turn down large upfront lump sum cash deals in exchange for ownership in the brands that they want to align with. We see recording artists, musical artists do this all the time. They go independent. I mean, listen to the Neil Young records, right? Neil Young famously told his record company to go shove it up their ass.
Yeah.
He couldn't get out of the deal, so he made like a joke of an album. Like to him, it was a joke.
Right. Yeah.
Because he wanted to just deliver a finished album to their recording company and move on once he satisfied his obligations on the delivery part and finally be under his own artistic freedom. We talked about how Bob Dylan doesn't like to have anybody else finish his songs. He wants to have the control, artistic freedom to tell the story. In business, we see it happen a lot. I have chosen in my path, chosen to avoid the large private equity and hedge fund structure in my company in favor of smaller deal by deal, opportunity by opportunity business development and growth. George, when you have a fund structure, you are under the gun to deploy capital very quickly because you're holding capital that you have to pay coupon on.
Right.
And the longer you hold it without deploying it into an asset, it just sinks you as a fund operator. So for me, I never wanted to raise money from investors and have it sit there in a fund structure. Instead, when I had an opportunity, I funded each one individually. And every property and every business I ever bought was its own separate, unique deal that I went to the capital markets and I went to my investors for. And we raised the money and we went in together uniquely, each one separate from one another. I never had a fund where I raised $300 million and then went out and looked for ways to deploy the 300. I found the deal first and got the money second. That was a choice that I made because I wanted more freedom. I wanted that to be my lifestyle rather than have the gun of the fund capital pointed at my head where I had to rush. I had handcuffs on. Yeah. I was under the mandates and the covenants of my agreements with my investors. And, you know, when you raise money in a fund structure, typically you have other funds investing in your fund.
Right.
So then you've got all sorts of rules and situations that you have to abide by. It's no longer your deal, man. It's no longer your company. It's no longer your vision. It's like some diluted, watered down version of a business that, you know, perhaps some of your original thoughts are there and a lot of what was there at the beginning has been taken away because your investors dictated that they get taken away.
Right.
So I never wanted that. I wanted the freedom to operate as I see fit. I felt like in my case, I was perhaps as smart or smarter than a lot of the people that I was asking to invest with me. And I didn't want to have them tell me how to run the business. And I'm glad for me because it ended up being the right decision for me. Other people, you know, it's the right decision for them to have a fund structure. For me, it wasn't. So in my case, I declined the big, huge fund structure in favor of the more agile, entrepreneurial, smaller company. And it worked out for me in my case.
Yeah, and I think we've spoken a little bit before about how important it is to ask yourself, well, what do I want my day to look like? You know, what do I want my day to look like? Because, you know, your days are eventually add up to what your life looks like. And so in that situation, it seems like the obvious thing to say, oh, I just want more. I just want, you know, bigger things, more money or whatever. But there's a specific way to go about that. So it makes sense. There is. You recently wrote about watching out for people who use the word interesting when describing
that's deal. My favorite. That's my favorite new peeve that I have.
Yeah, what does the word interesting say about the person that's using it?
So I find that in a business context, right, we're talking about business and investing.
Yep.
So we're not talking about the arts. We're not talking about interpersonal dialogue, right?
Totally.
Please, let's set the stage here. So in a business and investing context, the word interesting, so overused, and I want to write a violation and a ticket and penalize people that overuse the word interesting. Here's what I mean.
Yeah.
People that talk about investments, they go, oh, that's interesting. No, it's not interesting. Investments aren't interesting. They're either acceptable to you because they meet your investor criteria or they're not. I feel like the left brainers and the academics and the people that don't really know business and can't really roll up their sleeves and make stuff happen themselves. They sit in some office somewhere or in a basement somewhere and they look at a computer screen all day and they're just sort of like an analyst at best. Those people use the word interesting. Oh, that's interesting. Hey, I'd like to pitch to you a real estate deal. It pays a 20% IRR. Oh, that's interesting. No, it's not interesting, man. It's either a great deal because it meets your investor criteria or it's not, and you pass and you reject it because it doesn't meet your criteria. But people don't know how to talk about business or talk about investments, and so they use these other words. Right, and interesting is one of them, and I can't stand it.
Yeah.
If you're with me and you're pitching me a deal, or if I'm pitching you a deal and you use the word interesting, it's such a turnoff.
Yeah.
I want to talk numbers. I want to talk data. I want to talk investment alternatives and what the comparison opportunities are expressed in a numerical value. I don't want to say if it's interesting or not. That means nothing to me. Interesting is so subjective.
Yeah.
What's interesting to me might not be interesting to you. I don't even know what the word interesting means.
Yeah.
It sparks interest. I get that. But like,
No,
it doesn't
totally,
have, like, it's not quantifiable. So
100%,
I what I'm saying is to use the word interesting in a business and investing context where we focus and strive so hard to achieve a quantifiable measurement, right? We want to measure investments. We want to measure opportunities. We want to know which investment is the right one to go into. Well, there's metrics that we use to help us make those decisions. Interesting is not one of those metrics, is it?
Yeah, very rarely are your investors going to come to you and say, "Hey, Peter, are you doing any interesting deals that?"
People say that, George. I want to kill myself. I want to kill them. People say that all the time. I can't stand it. Don't use the word interesting. Instead, train yourself and learn how to speak the language of business and investing. Learn how to talk about metrics. Learn how to apply the metrics to your discussion. If you're an investor, you want to be told what a deal pays, how your money's coming in, what the money's used for, how the money's getting out, how you're going to get your return. That's how you invest. These are all quantifiable things that we can define using metrics. Interesting does not even get me to first base. If you use interesting with me, I'm just going to slap you upside the face. Because Uncle Peter is going to be the one to try and teach you about how to talk about business.
Yeah. And even just from we are talking specifically about business, but I think just in general, using the word interesting, there's almost always another word that is more
so
fitting.
Overused.
Yeah.
There was this one guy, I remember when I was first getting started and I was pitching anybody and everybody I knew in New York City. One guy was a broker that I'd bought some buildings from, and I was like, all right, I'll go to, I was trying to use my network. He was in my network because I'd bought some buildings from him. So I pitched him. His name was Peter. That's all I'm going to say. Lindsay Ornstein knows who I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And every time I pitched him and spoke to him about a deal, and these were small deals back then, and every time I pitched him and spoke to him, he was like, oh, that's interesting. And he went to some Ivy League school. So it wasn't that he was
unintelligent.
He was a very smart guy, dressed sharp, like he checked all the boxes. But at the end of the day, he was just an academic. He wasn't an operator. He wasn't an entrepreneur. He didn't know the lingo. And so when I pitched him on investing with me, he would say, oh, that's interesting. And Peter, what do you do if, and he would like ask me some abstract question about some business scenario.
Kind of
I'd answer the question and he'd go, oh, interesting. Like, fuck. And it was like time and time. And he sucked so much time out of my life. I mean, it was like, he was like a $25,000 investor. And I had spent like hundreds of hours on this guy. Right. And it was like getting blood from a stone. And all he kept saying was interesting. And then he never really invested.
Right.
It taught me quick how to sort of sift through the forest and be more effective quickly, because otherwise you can get sucked into this vortex of people just over communicating with you, talking your ear off. They want you to think that they're important and smart and knowledgeable because they're, he wanted me to think that he was a big guy.
Yeah.
And the way he did that was by using the word interesting all the time and asking me questions and putting me in more positions where I'd have to answer questions so he could say, oh, interesting. It's a long walk for a ham sandwich with this guy. And if you use the word interesting, you're likely also going to be a long walk for a ham sandwich. So be mindful of that, because you want people to bring you opportunities and you want people to reach out to you. Be quick and concise with them. They're going to be quick and concise with you, so they want you to do the same back. Don't get into a conversation where you're using the word interesting as your reaction to a deal. It's not interesting.
Yeah.
Deals aren't interesting. The arts are interesting.
Right.
Reading books is interesting. Yeah. Having great conversation with people who you can be with is interesting. But I got to tell you, investments are either pass or fail.
What does it mean to lose like a winner?
If you're a winner, you do everything like a winner does. How you do one thing is how you do everything. Winners lose all the time. The path to being a winner includes lots of failures and lots of loss.
Yeah.
It's so important that when you fail and when you lose like a winner. You keep your head up, maintain that positive attitude, figure out what the lesson is, figure out what to do differently next time. That's what winners do when they lose. What winners don't do when they lose is huff and puff and have a crappy attitude and get angry and, all those things that we see. That's not losing like a winner. That's losing like a loser. And you deserve to lose if you act like that. So even when you lose, you have to lose like a winner. That's what winners do. I teach my kid how to lose with dignity. I teach my team how to lose with dignity and with grace, because there's always loss. There's always failure. How you handle it is what separates the winners from the losers. Lose like a winner.
Ties back into that whole idea of it's a marathon, not a sprint, that tying everything into one victory or a loss is incredibly short-sighted and can't be indicative of long-term success. That you have to be able to say, well, this is this moment and I'm going to move on and do the best I can moving forward.
Yeah. I have a friend who is a woman, single. She dates a lot of people because she's looking for, she's single. And she has such an amazingly positive attitude about it. Every time she dates someone, doesn't work out, she doesn't retreat back to her house and become an emotional wreck and get angry with the world. And she just moves on. She's grateful. She learned what she liked and didn't like about this one person. She adjusts and she goes back out there. Yeah. I mean, I love that. And I applaud her for that.
Yeah.
And I know some young people who are attempting to launch their first businesses. They're being entrepreneurs and they're out there getting their asses handed them every day. They don't go home and cry. They don't kick and scream. They go home, they figure out what they need to adjust so that tomorrow they get back out and have a better chance of winning.
Yeah, so much of it, I think, is taking it personally, that I think a lot of times, especially in business or, arts is one of these things you see all the time where people feel like, oh, like I'm the failure. I've done something wrong. I'm the... How do you avoid... Because I don't think... You don't give the vibe that was ever something that you were doing and started taking losses personally. Was that just something you were born with, or was there something, the moment where you were like, oh, I need to make sure that I don't...
I learned early on that you just have to keep going. When you quit is when you lose. And not quitting is part of losing like a winner. Winners don't quit, right? Quitters never win, winners don't quit.
Yeah.
I learned early on that you just have to keep going. And you really only lose when you quit. So in order to do that, you just have to have the right mindset for it. If you have a crappy mindset and you take it personally and you're woe is me and you retreat like a turtle back into your shell, I mean, just not going to get anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. Zig Ziglar said, failure isn't a person, it's an event. That kind of thing.
I love that. You've said that before.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites. Yeah.
The good keeps getting better and the bad keeps getting worse. What did you say?
Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah, the good keeps getting better and the bad keeps getting
George,
worse.
I love when you give me zingers, man.
Yeah. Well, that one makes me happy because I came up with that one. So
yeah, very good.
Anything else that you want to touch on before we head out today? Anything that's been on your mind?
Well, our format may change for the next several months because it's summertime. So maybe our viewers will see a slightly different bit of content production and format from us for a little while. But other than that, no. That just means it's summertime, and I'm psyched for that.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm looking forward to it as well. All right, thanks so much, Peter, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
If you like what you just heard, you can subscribe to The Daily Cash Flow on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And we'd love it if you left us a comment or review. You can follow us on TikTok and Twitter at SiegelCap, and on Instagram at Siegel.cap. As always, if you're an accredited investor, go to SiegelCapital.com and take our survey to see if you qualify to take part in one of our apartment building deals. That's SIEGEL Capital.com.